I was 18 years old when I went down to Dublin with a fist full of money and a carload of dreams. Take your time, said my father, stop rushing like hell, and remember all's not what it seems to be. For there's fellas who'd cut you for the coat on your back, or the watch that you got from your mother. So take care, my young bucko, and mind yourself well. Would you give this sweet note to my brother? At the time, Uncle Benji was a policeman in Brooklyn, and my father, the youngest, looked after the farm. When a phone call from America said send the lad over, and my old fella said sure it wouldn't do any harm. For I've spent my life working this dirty old grind for a few pints of porter and the smell of a pond. And sure, maybe there's something you'll learn or you'll see if you can bring it back home. Make it easy on me. So I landed at Kennedy, and a big yellow taxi carried me and my bags through the streets and the rain. Well, my poor heart was thumping around with excitement that I hardly even heard what the driver was saying. We pulled in the shore parkways to the flatlands of Brooklyn, to my uncle's apartment on East 53rd. I was feeling so happy, I was humming a song, and I sang her as free as a bird. Well, to shorten the story, when I found out that day was Benji got shot down in an uptown parade. Oh, so while I was flying my way to New York, poor old Benji was lying in a cold city morgue. Well, I called up the old fella and I told him the news. I could tell he could hardly stand up in his shoes. And he wept as he told me, go ahead with the plan, and you're not to forget to be a proud Irishman. So I went down to Nellie's beside Fordham Road, and I started to learn about lifting the load. But the heaviest thing that I carried that year was the bittersweet thoughts of my hometown so dear. I went home in December 'cause the old fella died. Had to borrow some money off Phil on the side. When all the bright flowers and brass couldn't hide the pearl-wasted face of my father, we sold up the old barnyard for what it was worth, and into my bag stuck a handful of earth. And I boarded a train, and I caught me a plane, and I found myself back in the U.S. again. It's been 22 years since I've set foot in Dublin. The kids know to use the correct knife and fork, but I'll never forget the green grass and the rivers as I keep law and order on the streets of New York.
All right, welcome back. I am pulled like a leopard, and you'll excuse me if I haven't streamed. First of all, I was out of town. Second of all, it's just been a very busy time, both at work and trying to find new work, and also doing some other stuff. So I am basically going to be playing a little bit of catch up, but most of these stories are going to be fairly current. So just buckle in and be ready for some original opinions. First of all, I was just reading this while getting ready for the stream. The FBI is run by people who are paid to withhold information. They sit there, they investigate, and then they keep the details from the public because they don't think the public is privileged enough in order to know the truth about things that are blasted across the news. And this is a great example here because this is Officer Brian Sicknick, the late Officer Brian Sicknick, who was killed in the Capitol riot, supposedly. In reality, it's very possible he died of, a premature death of natural causes. Immediately afterwards, some would say it might have been a stroke, including his mom. However, the media and members of the Democratic Party essentially waved the bloody shirt and said he was a martyr of the Capitol riot, when soon thereafter, I think last month, at the beginning of last month, the New York Times and a number of other outlets had to retract their story claiming that he died from blunt force trauma from a rioter striking him with I believe it was a fire extinguisher. So when asked what was the cause of death for Brian Sicknick, the head of the FBI, Christopher Wray, who, as many of you are quick to remember, was appointed by Donald Trump. So this is basically Trump's fault, part of it, that this guy is the head of the FBI. He's saying, well, we cannot disclose the cause of death of the officer. Now, it's one thing to try and say, well, we're not going to say whether it was murder. We're not going to say whether we're going to charge anyone. We're not. But the idea that you're going to not disclose whether he died from one cause or another after almost 2 months of investigation, there was ample. He's probably been buried long ago, or cremated, whatever the family's wishes were. The idea that you can't disclose the cause of death for someone who was, first of all, a Capitol policeman, and so he was a public servant. It's not as if this is somebody who, was just a random person off the street. It's pretty obvious that Christopher Wray does not want to admit that the whole narrative surrounding the Capitol riot was largely constructed in order to turn it into some sort of epic moment, like the sack of Washington, D.C. by the British in 1812, and or was it 1813 or 14? I don't remember, but it was during the War of 1812. And I am going to say right now that we don't have any institutions that are supposedly serving the American people who are actually accountable to it. Today I was driving with someone who I work with, and they were asking me, what are the chances of the Republican Party taking back Congress in 2022? And I said, well, in my opinion, it doesn't really matter, because you could have the GOP controlling Congress. You could have the GOP controlling the presidency. First of all, the party itself is a joke, unfortunately. we're going to get to CPAC today. I did not watch the Trump CPAC speech, not because I didn't want to, but simply because I was on the road and I was doing a number of other things. So my apologies that I'm not totally dedicated to listening to every single conservative commentator, but it's a different reality right now. But I am not going to disengage from the reality that people seem to be just ignoring, right? Yes, we can elect people to be governor. We have a Republican governor here in my state, and the guy's a useless piece of shit. But we have Republican governors in states like Vermont and New Hampshire and Massachusetts and Maryland who are essentially identical to some of the worst Democratic governors, right? If you look at Larry Hogan, who's the governor of Maryland, he's promoting red flag laws. He's one of the foremost proponents of red flag laws, right? So there is no true party that is looking out for some of the core principles that supposedly are part of conservatism in the country. I would say that the Second Amendment shouldn't be just a principle of conservatism. I think every American should look hard at what's going on and the way the government's behaving. And by the way, the intervention in Syria, which I haven't really covered at all because of the lack of time, but believe me, I've been thinking about it a lot. This abuse of power that's been going on, and it's been just it's been more upfront just in the past month or so, but it was existing under Donald Trump as well. No, there is no party that will be able to take Congress and rein it in, and suddenly we're going to have a truly accountable federal government where people can have hope that the IRS will not quote unquote randomly audit them when they run an organization that runs against the administration's beliefs, right? So you having people in Congress who are responsive to you does not necessarily change that, because you still have people like Christopher Wray at the FBI who behave the way they do, that they say, well, I've been appointed and my responsibility is to, and what they really are saying, if you condense it, is my responsibility is to the institution that I run. It's not to the people who pay for that institution to exist, which is American citizens, right? Which is the states and the different citizens of those states that pay the taxes that create that institution, right? And sustain it. So Christopher Wray will basically sit there, as he did when there were Republican and Democratic legislators questioning him, and he'll basically, flip them the bird and say, oh, yeah, it's not really my responsibility. And there's many, many people in government like that. So I was bringing this story to illustrate really the problem with depending on electoral politics, that these people who get into legislative positions, get into state government even sometimes, they suddenly decide that, oh, I'm just a small chess piece over here. I can't really try to make a difference. And that's one of the problems with actually having optimism at this point, right? I think that American society and our form of government may be beyond just a simple electoral solution. There might have to be some sort of major conflict in order for people to realize it's not okay for the president to allow airstrikes across the world, right, over in Syria, with no actual imminent threat, right? The militias in Syria. So I'm going off on a tangent here. So we're going to pursue that tangent, and I'm going to say the militias in Syria do not pose an imminent threat to the USA, but the media does not care. The people at the Pentagon do not care, because they'll for sure obey the orders of the commander-in-chief, even if those orders are in many cases either illegal or of questionable, questionably thought through, right? What's the idea behind performing an airstrike against a militia, a pro-Iranian militia, granted, but so what? There have always been pro-Iranian militias throughout the Middle East. There's several pro-Iranian militias in Lebanon, for example, that have existed for decades. And it wouldn't really help if the United States was involved actively in fighting a war in Lebanon. And I can tell you, because I know a number of people from Lebanon who have said, that it's a country that's a great mess, and no other country is going to be able to sort it out. It's just too complicated. You probably could say the same about a number of these countries in the Middle East. So today I was listening to the Ron Paul Liberty Report, which I now download on Podbean. So those of you that are tired of using YouTube, you can actually download a number of these shows audio only on Podbean. That's something that is very convenient for me because I drive a lot. So Ron Paul was talking about a lot of the problems and why he personally agreed with the Iranian nuclear deal, which I disagree with him on, but he said it was a mistake on Donald Trump's part to back out of the Iranian nuclear deal. And he hopes that Biden can get a new nuclear deal with Iran. But I think it's just Ron Paul's unique way of expressing himself. When in reality, I think in his mind he knows that Joe Biden isn't really the person running American foreign policy. He's really a figurehead in many senses of the word. He even talked about the fact that there's a whole staff of people who actually run the foreign policy. People like Tony Blinken, who I wrote about before. By the way, so I wrote an article about Blinken. There's also this article up from a week and a half ago about the Lincoln Project and the new and more pathetic version of the Lincoln Project, which is what I call the principled party, that principled asterisk party, which is going to be run by Evan McMullin, supposedly. I don't think it's actually going to go anywhere, but it will be a vehicle for raising money. So that's really what happens in these circles in Washington, D.C. You have all these morons who run around, and Ron Paul was talking about that today, and they work for these think tanks, and they talk about these grand solutions and how we're going to need big moves in the Middle East or big moves over in Latin America. And they just never seem to understand that their theories don't apply in these countries where the locals have free will, right? We can't go into a country like Colombia and dictate the way that the locals behave. It didn't work there, and it didn't work in any of the other countries that we're talking about. So I did want you to read that article, even though I already talked about it last time. At this point, I do want to mention, so there is the newsletter. I haven't put out a newsletter, I think, for the past 2 weeks, so we're going to have one coming up probably next week. Okay, it's an infrequent newsletter, so don't worry about being spammed. You can subscribe to me on Rumble. I also want to pimp my Telegram channel, so I do share stuff throughout the day if you guys like using Telegram. So the Telegram address, I'm going to put it again in the chat. It's also in the description. So, you can comment on it. You can unfortunately, it's not the type where you can share your own stories. I think for Telegram's own peace of mind, they don't really do that, but that's the way it is. But I personally use Telegram, and I'm quite satisfied with it for a number of reasons. This is my Odyssey channel, my BitChute channel. So I encourage you to subscribe to me there because, there's sometimes I release videos that you won't get notifications for on YouTube. There's sometimes that you won't be able to catch me live, or the video might even be hidden on YouTube because typically I'm not able to completely avoid some of the keywords that YouTube flags. By the way, there has been, on the subject of the letter I just said, there has been a warning on several of my videos in the past concerning a certain conspiracy theory that I don't subscribe to, that I've actually criticized, but because I mentioned it on the channel, I get the warning, right? So I'm actually doing the type of work that YouTube itself says it is, which they're not. YouTube is plenty happy to have that idiotic theory completely blasted around YouTube because they love the stupid clicks that it gets. But I get the warning anyway. So explain that policy, right? Everybody knows that YouTube is moving away from independent creators, and they're moving towards becoming a wholly corporate and just a monolith, right? It's not dedicated towards the average user who wants to put on videos. They might be entertainment videos, they might be videos about cooking, but YouTube doesn't care anymore. They're out of that business. They're partnering with A&E or whoever it is, Disney, and trying to get some of that sweet corporate cash. Okay, so we already talked about the FBI, and really the main challenge that I think is more important than just winning elections. That doesn't mean I don't think that the electoral process is important in some ways, because yes, there are certain things that affect you directly, right? There's various zoning issues that can go on. Certain ballot issues come up, right? For example, in California, there was the famous one repealing some of the Civil Rights Act legislation that was brilliantly put together by a bunch of geniuses in California, saying that, now as the state of California, they said all this anti-discrimination legislation, it was actually preventing them from creating equality and equity, because now they want to discriminate against white people. They want to discriminate against cisgender heterosexual men. They want to, in some cases, redefine Latinos as white people, right? Based on arbitrary definitions that are more linked to their opinion than on their actual genetics. So I do think that when you realize how inconsequential your vote is, you still have to judiciously try to use it whenever you can. And local elections, I think, are in some cases more important. In fact, there's a guy who bothers me a lot about that. And, he bothers people that I know about it, and he tries to get them to run for office, even though in some cases they probably would not be they wouldn't be fitting for office, some of the people that he tries to pick out. So what to do about CPAC, right? So this friend of mine did go to CPAC, and he thoroughly enjoyed himself. And my position has been in the past that I don't really want to go to these events because I'm not a social creature, first of all. And that's really why a lot of people go there, to meet and greet people. And there are people that are great at doing that. But I think that unless you already have someone who is sponsoring you and giving you some sort of boost, it's sometimes a waste of time, right? But I know people who actually enjoy the event, and that's fine. If you enjoy going to get-togethers that are concerned with politics, I don't. But if you do, then that's fine. Apparently, this was one of the most publicized political conferences in history. I don't know the numbers. I don't know if there are metrics for things like that. And I think the reason for this is that no matter what people say, Donald Trump has remained this lightning rod for attention because, he's a person who can gain clicks. He can get headlines. The New York Times even says, and I'm reading this right here, CPAC takeaways, Trump dominates and DeSantis and Noem stand out. So that refers to Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota. So a lot of people are raving about Donald Trump's speech, and I'll have to disclose here, I didn't listen to the speech. I've only heard a few tidbits. And I'm sure Donald Trump delivered a great address and everything. It apparently was 2 hours long. So I'm going to put it out here, my opinion on what the prospects are for Donald Trump and what personally I feel like I'm going to do, okay? I would say I'm open to voting for him again, but I'm only going to say that I'm open to voting for him again. I'm not going to commit to it because we've already had him in power before, and I think we as a country we could do better than him, right? It's not like I think he's accomplished more than many presidents did. I think he failed in certain ways that people aren't willing to acknowledge. But to say that, oh, we love this guy, he was amazing, because we're in such a poor situation, we should go back to what we're used to. That's not really the mentality I think that's gonna be able to create some of the changes I think are necessary, such as the ones concerning the FBI and the CIA and the intelligence community and probably some of the domestic agencies like the IRS and the Department of the Interior that do certain persecutory things here in the United States as well. We do need someone, I think, who may be better, right? And the idea that we're gonna get something better from Donald Trump if he were to have a second term in office after 2024. I just don't have faith that that's going to happen, unfortunately. And I'll explain why. He came into office, and I think that he was always in a fighting mood. And you needed to be given the way the media was treating him, right? So I'm not going to say that some of his mistakes were, I'm not going to say that all of his mistakes were willful and stupid and he had no strength and he was just an idiot or whatever. But he made some serious mistakes. And the people that he picked in order to head some of these departments, such as Gina Haspel, who headed, so this is an department, but she heads the CIA. I think she might have recently left because Biden appointed his own CIA director. People like Jeff Sessions, who I don't think was a great attorney general pick, and obviously Christopher Wray, and you see people like his Supreme Court justice pick. Brett Kavanaugh, who at the time I don't think was a great pick. That doesn't mean what the Democrats did to him was correct, but I think he was tragically a flawed pick because a lot of these people are conditioned by the system that they've been a part of their entire careers, right? They've been a part of the Washington system or the system, like if you're from the FBI, the system of Quantico, right? Or wherever the Department of Justice is in D.C., or if you're in the CIA, they have Langley, right? That's the city in Virginia where apparently the CIA has its headquarters. So you have these people who are conditioned to that culture, and they're loyal to that culture. And Donald Trump, as president, he decided, yeah, I think I will take people who are part of that system. And what did they do? They protected the system. They didn't protect the actual policies that he was elected in order to pursue. So policies of non-intervention, policies of not infringing on the privacy and the civil liberties of other Americans. And I'll be specific here. The FBI under Trump persecuted some of his own colleagues, some of his campaign aides, people like Roger Stone, people like George Papadopoulos. And I think that strategically, yeah, he played the long game. He was able to avoid legal consequences for himself because there was no case in the end. Robert Mueller came up completely empty. But at what price? The Roger Stone is in his, I think, in his late 70s, and he's basically been, what do you call it? He's gone through a whole lot of lawfare in order to ruin his life and bankrupt him. So and by the way, it's not like I listen to Roger Stone. I don't really, I find him entertaining, but personally, I don't listen to his show. Yeah, I think that Donald Trump made some fatal flaws and fatal mistakes. I mean, he was fatally flawed in his presidency. And that's one of the reasons that he's no longer president, because I think strategically he was outsmarted at certain critical junctures, right? He put into power certain people. For example, remember the Anthony Scaramucci debacle? I don't know if you also remember all the times that Jared Kushner steered him wrong on certain policies or who to hang out with and who not. Apparently, this is via a few other people. Jared Kushner rejected the proposal to have Matt Drudge visit the White House. And because of that, Matt Drudge, from what I understand, turned against Donald Trump. I never really used the Drudge Report, so it never really affected me. But the biggest message I have here is that, yes, Donald Trump is not the best judge of character sometimes. And that bears repeating when you look at some of the big issues that are going to be on the table going forward. We're in a worse situation now that he's out of power. But let's not kid ourselves. When he was in power, there were a number of areas where you could see that the Trump administration was literally getting hamstrung, and the government itself was pushing back on him, right? Sierra MC is saying that Drudge was a sellout. I get what you're talking about, but what we're seeing right now a real degeneration of American prestige overseas, right? People were saying that once Biden would get into power, that America would be back and people would respect America again. And I don't think it's true. I think given what's happened in the past month, from what I understand, Japan and Australia are both starting to realize that they can't depend on the United States in order to defend them from Chinese encroachment. So they're pursuing somewhat independent strategies as far as that's concerned. So everybody was talking about under Trump, oh, we're abandoning our allies, we're alienating the rest of the world. And the truth is that under Biden, it's a little bit more true. The other thing that I think is important to mention is that I think Trump should have initially, and this is, I get it that some people will say, oh, how can you blame him for this? I do think that he made a huge mistake here. When at the beginning of his presidency, the media was making a huge hubbub about Russia and everything, and that he should treat Putin as some sort of aggressor. He should have come out guns blazing, figuratively, and said, no, the truth is that there is no substance to this media-generated story that Russia tampered with the election, that they're trying to dominate America. It's untrue. I will legally fight this. I will do everything in my power in order to prevent a world conflict between the United States and Russia. He didn't do it. Maybe he realized that it would have probably distracted his presidency even more than it did. But the fact is that even with Trump playing along and putting sanctions on Russia and avoiding too much contact with Putin, the media never actually gave him credit for any of that. They continually tied him to the Russian government all the time. So in retrospect, what did he have to lose at the time? To use his own terminology, Trump loves to say, what do you have to lose? Well, we had everything to gain from pursuing a policy of engagement with Russia. There are other countries in the West that are perfectly fine with, like Germany, Israel. They talk to Russia all the time, and they actually have very lucrative partnerships with Russia. I happen to be one of the people who dwell on this a lot, that say that if the United States and Russia could partner and work on certain fault lines around the world, especially the Middle East, we wouldn't have as many conflicts that are active as we do now. But I believe in Washington, they don't have an interest in avoiding those conflicts. So, yeah, I won't agree with Ron Paul on every issue. I don't agree with him that the Iran nuclear deal was a good idea, but I do agree with him that we have to disengage with this warmongering strategy against Russia, this encroachment into Ukraine. And no, I don't believe Russia should be invading Ukraine, but I don't think that they one day they just woke up and said, hey, we have to retake Ukraine, or we have to I think that there was a long process. I know MC might disagree, but Russia started to see that eventually NATO will literally start to talk about ways to dismantle Russia itself. right? Russia is a federation. And, in some ways, this was a defensive strategy on the part of the Russian government. And, the government continues, the U.S. government continues to try to rattle sabers against Russia. So to return to the CPAC speech, I think there could be a better candidate in the future. So while people are saying, I'm going to vote for Trump again in 2024, I don't think you should commit yourself fully to it. I think that if he were to be the candidate and then there were no other good candidates, which there probably won't be, yeah, I think I'd vote for him. But if DeSantis came and became, the front runner or Trump retired, I would certainly think DeSantis would be a good nominee given his management of the coronavirus pandemic. By the way, you're now seeing the results of this whole year of disinformation come to fruition. I am going to be writing a little bit about it regarding what's happened in Massachusetts, not just in New York, but Massachusetts had some crazy disinformation over the past year or so. I'm going to be writing a little bit about that, hopefully on the newsletter and on my next American Greatness article regarding that. But you see today, Texas and Mississippi are both reopening completely. And I think in the near future, you're going to see, some of these other, even some blue states are going to say, wow, why are we still locked down, right? And they're going to just abandon some of this tyranny. But who knows, right? Now, on that note, so in one of the most ironic statements ever, Hillary Clinton says, Cuomo's accusers deserve answers. So I haven't covered Andrew Cuomo especially closely. I will say that Breitbart had an article, which I find to be convincing, saying that the reason that the media is going after Cuomo so hard on this Me Too stuff is in order to throw him to the wolves and hopefully avoid more scrutiny for some of the other governors like Tom Wolf of Pennsylvania or Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, who have mismanaged the pandemic perhaps even worse than, or not worse, but they've definitely mismanaged the pandemic. Almost as bad as Andrew Cuomo. And by making this more of a sexual harassment issue and something that has to do with Cuomo's personality, it'll look more like an isolated incident as opposed to something that is sort of a character trait of a number of these Democratic governors, which is that they believe that they have some sort of divine right to put their policies in place, and those that oppose them are endangering the public health, right? That'll get into my final message for tonight, which is going to come on in a few minutes. But Hillary Clinton, a woman who called her husband's problems with women, right? His harassment, his in some cases his direct sexual assault, in some cases his consensual affairs. He called those bimbo eruptions. She called those bimbo eruptions, right? Back in the 90s, and his staff called them bimbo eruptions. A guy who's still on TV, James Carville, he said regarding Paula Jones, who was one of Clinton's accusers from when he was governor, he said that if you drag a $100 bill through a trailer park, there's no telling what you'll pull out. Well, the truth is that Paula Jones wasn't from a trailer park. She was a perfectly, middle-class Arkansas lady. Obviously not someone who was from the highest part of society, but she wasn't some sort of trailer trash. And when you listen to Paula Jones, it's pretty obvious that this isn't a woman who is living with her third husband and they own a couple greyhounds and they live out in the sticks and go boating all the time and have 5 shotguns on their truck. And, the stereotype was quite inappropriate, especially given someone like James Carville, who should know better, but he was using his own identity in order to get away with it, right? That's the way a lot of these politicians are. People like Andrew Cuomo and people like James Carville, who's not a politician but is a political consultant. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton Monday backed an investigation into allegations New York Governor Andrew Cuomo sexually harassed multiple women. These stories are difficult to read, and the allegations brought forth raise questions that the women who have come forward and all New Yorkers deserve answers to, she said in a statement. I'm glad to see that there will be a full, independent, and thorough investigation. So she didn't even say that directly. She said it through a statement released to the media. Clinton's comments come 2 days after an accusation surfaced from Charlotte Bennett, a 25-year-old staffer who claimed Cuomo talked about his willingness to have relationships with women in their 20s. On Monday, New York Attorney General Letitia James announced that Cuomo's office had sent her a letter allowing her to conduct an independent investigation. Prior to Bennett's allegations surfacing, Cuomo aide Lindsey Boylan published a blog post accusing the governor of unwanted touching and kissing. Boylan accused the governor of going out of his way to touch me on my lower back, arms, and legs, kissing her while they were alone in his office, and suggesting that they played strip poker during a plane ride. Cuomo's office has denied Boylan's harassment claims and said he never made inappropriate advances towards Bennett. Despite the accusations, Clinton and other prominent Democrats, Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts and Vice President Kamala Harris, refrained from publicly commenting on the issue. This is amazing, right? You have women. Now, I did see that hilarious sausage video. I don't think that it, like, maybe we can go through it a little bit. So he tells a reporter to eat the whole sausage. I will say that while I do think it's inappropriate, I don't know if you should resign because of it. I do.
Feel the same way too.
Will you eat the whole sandwich?
I will eat the whole sandwich.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah. Who made sausage? I can eat the whole sandwich.
So Cuomo's daughter is right next to him there. And yeah, I think it's a little bit.
Eat the sausage, but
That's
you have
that's
to.
part of the being the governor, right? Learning how to.
Well, there is a course when you get elected to office. They have a course called Eating on Camera. Yeah, there's too much sausage in that thing. Yeah.
So while I think this is cringeworthy, I don't think it qualifies as something that I would say, oh, Cuomo, he needs to go because of this. No. Him having an inappropriate conversation about sausages in the public with his daughter present, saying some pretty, like, you know, cringeworthy stuff, pales in comparison to the nursing home scandal. It pales in comparison to a lot of the other dictatorial things he's done. Look, I've been to New York several times in the past few months, including very recently. And I can say that whether it's Cuomo himself or it's Mayor de Blasio in the city, the state looks like it's basically been completely wrecked, right? The whole economy is just imploded there, right? You walk through the streets, it doesn't really feel like a bustling metropolis. It's not like, I'm not the best authority on it because it's not as if I traveled or lived in New York for very long, but you can see that there is sort of a malaise in the city, right? And you go to some other parts of the country like Florida, it's quite the opposite, right? So the thing I think that I believe is like not even mentioned in this article, and this is from Fox News, is that Cuomo was a cabinet officer under President Clinton. He was the Secretary of Housing for a little while. I think he was Secretary of Housing after Henry Cisneros was forced to resign. So it's not just an issue of Hillary Clinton breaking with Andrew Cuomo or saying that, he needs to be investigated. Like, would she have said the same thing, first of all, about her husband, right? Should she have said that? What's her name is not Rainey, but one second, I can see it up here. Kathleen Willey, right? So Kathleen Willey is a woman who Clinton apparently groped in the White House Oval Office library, and I can't find it up there, but it is up there. So Kathleen Willey has a book called Target, which I can't find for whatever reason. Oh, here it is. So at the time, even the FBI was saying that because of her allegations against Bill Clinton, she was undergoing actual intimidation from Clinton operatives who would visit her house and apparently killed her cat and things like that. And she, among others, is lucky to be alive today. So if Cuomo's accusers deserve answers, so do her husband's accusers. Willie was raped by Clinton, according to her. I believe that, yeah, there was some sort of, it wasn't like, okay, I don't want to get too technical. It wasn't quite full rape, but it was inappropriate sexual assault. Let me put it that way. So I will say that Hillary Clinton saying this about Cuomo, it is, I would say, a bad sign for him. People are starting to abandon him, and they're abandoning him because he's of no further use. So, yes, I think that this is a scandal that is worthy of some media attention, but it's not worthy of more media attention than the nursing home scandal. Right? Although the sausage video is a little weird. But, yeah, Cuomo's polling has plummeted. Not that I really care about polling. I don't really use polling as a metric. But if the media is saying that his polls are going bad, then they obviously are. Let me see here. So New York Post again says only a 38% approval rating from registered voters, while 48% of respondents disapprove. So it's obviously pretty bad, but he's had bad approval ratings before. MC is saying nothing will happen to Cuomo, will blow over just like the racist Northam. I think you might be right. I think that, and I think MC, if I'm not mistaken, comes from either New York State or somewhere close by. So I have a cousin who lives in Western New York, right? Think, the Great Lakes region. And he's been complaining about Cuomo for over 8 years. And he's been saying, oh, this is the time he's finally going to go. And it just hasn't happened because as a state, New York is very apathetic in terms of its elections. And there's also not the best electoral security, if I can put it that way. Right. It's just not a great situation and I understand completely why people leave New York State and they move to other states like Florida or from what I understand, a lot of New Yorkers used to move to Maryland. They might not be moving to Maryland anymore because it's basically become New York Junior. But yeah, based on what I've seen, I wouldn't live there. I'm sorry, I would never live there, unfortunately. Not unless something serious happened. This is from the Glorious American. They're sort of like the Babylon Bee. They're pretty good. It says, Andrew Cuomo quickly releases book on how he never sexually abused staff called Above Reproach. So that's a parody. It is... remember that Cuomo is the person, he has the worst metrics on the coronavirus, not just in the United States, but if New York State was a nation in and of itself, it would have the worst metrics worldwide in terms of the coronavirus. In fact, that's one of the reasons that the U.S. as a whole has had problems, reining in the virus. Like we do have officially the worst numbers in terms of coronavirus deaths and infections. But a lot of it is because of New York State. And I was listening to Clay Travis today. He says that as of today, New York has the worst metrics in the country in terms of coronavirus cases and deaths. So the idea that this guy was ever held out to be a case for success shows that the media always goes for style over substance, because they never really think that Americans are capable of understanding the substance, right? They don't think that Americans can look at a line graph and realize that something isn't matching up, right? They don't think that Americans, like them, know how to use either Excel or any other program that can do basic analysis of figures and look at trend lines and realize that this guy was clearly mismanaging it. He was obviously bluffing the entire time. He was talking, he was a horrible leader. Still, I think that those of you that think that Andrew Cuomo is just going to be swept out of office because now some Democrats are abandoning him, they don't realize how broken the system is. Because, like MC is saying, Ralph Northam was spared the indignity of having to resign, even though he was caught lying, bald-faced lying about a yearbook photo where he was either in blackface or in a Klan outfit, right? So if that could happen, and this was before coronavirus, and you now have a guy who for over a year was treated like the bee's knees because he supposedly was the greatest governor in the world, and now they're beginning to tear away a little bit of that image. No, I think Andrew Cuomo could probably fill out the rest of his term. And I don't know about running again. I would defer to someone else. But, yeah, I think he could survive, unfortunately. I know people in New York. And, including, like I said, I have a cousin in Western New York. And I feel bad for them. I don't think all of New York is like the people who are in the media, right? There's a lot of people who are there because I visit there. I see all sorts of different people having to deal with this reality, and I don't think I would be able to do it day in and day out. That's why I think a lot of them are leaving, because they've had enough. So I'm sorry for you guys, but I don't think it's going to get better for the time being. And that's just my opinion. Neera Tanden has removed herself from consideration for budget chief. Now, some people will start to say, oh, this is a big victory for the GOP. This is some sort of amazing, blowback for Biden or whatever. I'm going to temper expectations. The reason Neera Tanden didn't become the head of the Office of Budget and Management in the White House is because it has nothing to do with the Republicans being strong, right? The Republican Party is as weak as ever. You saw that because Mitch McConnell this weekend, he said, oh, if Donald Trump got nominated again, I would certainly consider, supporting him. That's a sign of a person who has no moral conviction, right? Because only a couple months ago, he was blaming Trump for the riot, which I was against, right? I think he was wrong for doing that. But I also think he's wrong for saying I would support him if he was my party's nominee or whatever. If you have a problem with Donald Trump and you think it's some sort of a core moral issue, and then you say, oh, but if he was the nominee, then I would support him, that shows that you don't have any moral conviction, Mitch McConnell. And that's one of the reasons I think the Republican Party is so awful. I think that Donald Trump is not going to solve that, unfortunately. I think that he himself is flawed in some ways on a personal level, but it pales in comparison to the two-party system that he's trying to navigate through. So Nick's Radio, who also has a channel on YouTube and I think also on Minds, is saying in New York they reelected AOC even after she torpedoed the Amazon deal. I don't think they're going to care about Cuomo's problems either, right? So in that case, they lost jobs. In this case, they've lost, thousands of people dead. The electorate in New York is they sort of unfortunately got what they voted for, right? They had an incompetent governor in Cuomo. He was a horrible governor way before coronavirus. People have been saying that upstate New York has been in a depression for years, right? Upstate New York meaning above Westchester County. I think it starts above Westchester County. If you're from the area, you can correct me. Or above, I guess, the lower Hudson, so maybe a little bit west of there. Think places like Utica and Syracuse and Rochester. So I've been to Rochester, and yeah, it does look like it's in a depression, and that's putting it lightly. They just keep reelecting this idiot, and what's to expect that? What's to say that he won't be reelected? New York doesn't have term limits. He could be governor forever, and I don't understand why people seem to think that there's going to be this sudden epiphany among the people. I think that the people of New York have to wake themselves up. They can't depend on the media. They can't depend on the politicians. They can't, because they themselves have they've gotten into this situation, and it's gonna require a real event in order for this to change. So Neera Tanden is out. It's partially because of Joe Manchin, a Democrat from West Virginia, who said that he was not going to vote for her. Most signs point to the fact that Manchin took it personally. Some insults that Tanden leveled against his daughter, who was part of the whole EpiPen controversy because she was an executive at the company in West Virginia that produces EpiPens. I forget what the company's called, so excuse me for that. But he took it personally. I think it's a very petty reason not to nominate her, but she was a bad nominee anyway. She was, first of all, she's clearly a political person, political through and through, activist political. Donald Trump had a nominee in Mick Mulvaney who was political, but he doesn't have the long and bitter past that Neera Tanden had, right? You can look at Office of Management and Budget, and the directors have included largely these very great people like Leon Panetta, who was a congressman, a Democratic congressman. He was defense secretary. So he was under Clinton, and a lot of these people, look, I probably would never agree with them politically, but they were very, sedate characters. Rob Portman, who's a senator from Ohio. Now, I don't like Rob Portman. He was director of the office under President Bush. I think he was a bad senator. He's retiring. But I think he was qualified to be the head of the Office of Management and Budget, partially because he was part of the House Budget Committee when he was in Congress, right? He was, in fact, let me see here. In any case, yeah, he'd been trade representative before that. He was eminently qualified to do it. So, you don't have to necessarily agree with someone politically, but when you have someone like her, like Neera Tanden, who is just, constantly nitpicking people and attacking them personally, and in some cases canceling them or accusing them of being Russian agents. Why would you ever have someone like that running the White House Office of Management and Budget? So I'm glad that she was defeated. I think Joe Manchin, maybe for the wrong reasons, did the right thing. But it says here, Senator Bernie Sanders, a frequent foe of Tanden's, had appeared on CNN shortly before Tanden removed herself and refused to say if he would support her. And he says, well, right now, Neera Tanden doesn't have the vote, so we'll see what happens in the future, Sanders said. when pressed, Sanders said, "I will make that decision when the vote takes place." So Bernie Sanders wasn't ready to take the courageous position and say, no, I'm not going to support Neera Tanden. She didn't support me. She constantly attacked me. She constantly attacked my supporters. And that's really one of the problems with the progressive movement, that they're led by people like Bernie Sanders who don't have the courage to say, no, I'm not going to go along with this. And that's it. He should have been a no vote too, and that would have made this a lot more simple. Instead, they had to pretend that Lisa Murkowski could keep her nomination afloat. Lisa Murkowski also should have said no long ago. Anyway, so I do want to wrap up with a final thought. So I know a lot of you out there, you're looking forward to the upcoming, whether it's Passover is next month. There's also, I think, Easter falls around the same time. This is the Lenten period. So unfortunately, I'm going to sort of talk about the problem with religious thinking and applying it to politics, because many people are talking about how woke cancel culture is akin to religion. And I think it's incredibly appropriate to use that analogy, right? Because when you look at the things that are being done in order to attain this more enlightened society that the woke are calling for, it entails cleansing society of what are called impure elements, right? And this is the way witch hunts happen. Remember that in the past, people were being persecuted for witchcraft, right? This is something that happened. Over the weekend there was the Nordic rune that was. They were accusing CPAC of having this. One second. So this is one of the funniest stories that has funny, but also like clearly a sign of how poorly society has adapted to to having at least a little bit of a skeptical mind. So you can see that they are claiming that the CPAC podium. Now, I said before, I didn't go to CPAC. I didn't watch CPAC. I don't really care what happens at CPAC generally. But they did have this stage design, and you can see that there are walkways from the right and the left and from the back of the stage and everything, and it comes out into this shape. And they said, oh, it's like this Odo rune that's one of the SS insignia. So it's just so ridiculous that people are going back to that. And one of the reasons I think that is that it's let me see here. So this is an old Germanic symbol, right? And the reason I think that we're talking about a religious crusade here against people that are impure, that's what wokeism is because it's the same idea from in the 90s when they were talking about witchcraft and Marilyn Manson videos, or they were talking about how remember why did John Lennon get murdered? I'm actually not a John Lennon fan, but people were thinking, or specifically his murderer thought, Mark David Chapman, that the Beatles were witches and that they were using their music in order to convert the youth to some sort of satanic or pagan lifestyle or something. So it's the same idea as back then, right? They're trying to say that there's some sort of hidden messaging there, and I see it when conservatives do it too. So it's not as if I don't think that this is. It's not as if I think this is something that's unique to the media or unique to the ideological left or the corporate left or whatever. But Robespierre felt the effect of wokeness. Very true, Will Redding. This is really an element of Inquisition style thinking. It's the Salem witch trials. It's like every other persecutory fever that's happened in world history, right? And there's other societies that have done it. Remember, there was the Cambodian genocide, where if you wore glasses, it was a sign that you were an intellectual and you had to be murdered because they were returning to year zero. They were going to refound man. And there's endless other examples. There was, what is it? The four olds of, let me see here. Was it four? Was it 8 olds? Yes, it's the 4 olds of Chinese, of the Cultural Revolution, where it said old ideas, old culture, old habits, and old customs. So people are comparing it to the Cultural Revolution in China, the Inquisition in Spain, and by the way, also in Italy, to various persecutions that have happened throughout human history, right? Or I mean, if you're a Christian, I'm not a Christian, by the way, but people compare it to the trial of Jesus by the Pharisees, right? If you believe that trial was unjust, there's certain people in the audience who would think that it was not unjust, because that was the society that Jesus lived in, and remember. But it's not the society that America is about. The society of America does not make people go through, these trials for things that they may believe, or certain, maple syrups that they might use, or the shape of a stage, or which children's book they read, like Cat in the Hat. Suddenly you can't read it to your child, or what have you, right? That's not the way American society was built. So that's largely that's largely the problem that I'm seeing right now. You're applying religious persecutory thinking to the way that you think will make America less racist, make it less judgmental, make it less intolerant of the various sexual minorities that are out there, right? The transgenders and the homosexuals and all these other different genders or whatever. So you're thinking that the various methods that failed to eliminate witchcraft in the past, that failed to eliminate Chinese culture in China, that failed to eliminate Protestantism during the Reformation in some of these Catholic countries, right? And or even if it did eliminate Protestantism, those countries remained pretty poor, right? Spain remained pretty backward because of the Inquisition and because of a lot of the other authoritarian policies it put in place. You think that type of mentality is going to make America a more prosperous world and a more prosperous country, a more harmonious society? You think that type of process is going to make society better? I don't think so. I think it's probably going to lead to many of these people regretting that type of behavior, because they're going to fall under the same. They're going to fall on their own sword eventually, right? They're going to basically find themselves hoisted on their own petard. Andrew Cuomo is an excellent example of that. He's a guy. He was nominated by the the Women's Equality Party, which is a party that's about the Equal Rights Amendment. He constantly talked about the Me Too sexual harassment stuff and Harvey Weinstein, and even today he invoked that by saying it's not just about the state government, it's about the media, and it's about Hollywood and whatever. No, we're talking about you now. So people always want to deflect the standards that they want to impose on everyone else away from themselves. And that's really how I believe a lot of these things burn out, because you start to see that these dictatorial ambitions tend to consume the people that put them in place in some cases, right? Unfortunately, some dictators are so brutal and so successful that they never see any sort of justice. But we'll see what happens. That's about it for today. I want to remind you to read the newsletter. You can find it at the link over here. Okay. I want you to subscribe on Rumble if you prefer using Rumble. I personally prefer using Odyssey, but you're free to subscribe on any of these platforms. You got BitChute here. You have Odyssey. Here, why don't you use this one? And finally, if you want to chat with me, or sorry, you can comment on some of my posts throughout the day. There's my Telegram channel. You can also find me on Minds and Gab. Those are in the description. Some other platforms as well. Won't go into that right now. Have a great night, and stay safe out there.
I was 18 years old when I went down to Dublin with a fist full of money and a carload of dreams. Take your time, said my father, stop rushing like hell, and remember all's not what it seems to be. For there's fellas who'd cut you for the coat on your back, or the watch that you got from your mother. So take care, my young bucko, and mind yourself well. Would you give this sweet note to my brother? At the time, Uncle Benji was a policeman in Brooklyn, and my father, the youngest, looked after the farm. When a phone call from America said send the lad over, and my old fella said sure it wouldn't do any harm. For I've spent my life working this dirty old grind for a few pints of porter and the smell of a pond. And sure, maybe there's something you'll learn or you'll see if you can bring it back home. Make it easy on me. So I landed at Kennedy, and a big yellow taxi carried me and my bags through the streets and the rain. Well, my poor heart was thumping around with excitement that I hardly even heard what the driver was saying. We pulled in the shore parkways to the flatlands of Brooklyn, to my uncle's apartment on East 53rd. I was feeling so happy, I was humming a song, and I sang her as free as a bird. Well, to shorten the story, when I found out that day was Benji got shot down in an uptown parade. Oh, so while I was flying my way to New York, poor old Benji was lying in a cold city morgue. Well, I called up the old fella and I told him the news. I could tell he could hardly stand up in his shoes. And he wept as he told me, go ahead with the plan, and you're not to forget to be a proud Irish man. So I went down to Nellie's beside Fordham Road, and I started to learn about lift and load. But the heaviest thing that I carried that year was the bittersweet thoughts of my hometown so dear. I went home in December 'cause the old fella died. Had to borrow some money, all fell on the side. When all the bright flowers and brass couldn't hide the pearl-wasted face of my father, we sold up the old barnyard for what it was worth, and into my bag stuck a handful of earth. And I boarded a train, and I caught me a plane, and I found myself back in the US again. It's been 22 years since I've set foot in Dublin. The kids know to use the correct knife and fork, but I'll never forget the green grass and the rivers as I keep law and order on the streets of New York.